If you are starting a vertical farm and don't know where to begin or which technology would suit your needs, then reach out to the experts at Cultivated. As indoor farm brokers, they help connect you to the right technology and ensure your project is successful. Best of all, their service is free because they work on behalf of their partners. Visit cultivated.com to learn more. And that's spelled cultivatd.com, or click the link in the show notes.
Because it's a classic error for a lot of scale-up companies is to expand too quickly and overextend yourself. You get one vertical farm that goes wrong, or I don't know, there's an E. coli outbreak because you don't have the right policies in place and the operator who's bought the farm hasn't followed them. That'll come back to your brand. So that's a really good case to be made for not expanding too quickly.
Welcome to the Vertical Farming Podcast, weekly conversations with fascinating CEOs, founders, and AgTech visionaries. Join us every week as we dive deep into the world of vertical farming with your host, Harry Duran.
Vertical Farming Podcast, welcome back. Season 5, still in full effect. If this is your first time listening, thank you so much for taking the chance on this podcast. You were probably searching for something about indoor ag, controlled environment agriculture, or vertical farming, and you were looking for a podcast and you ended up here. And so I want to roll out the welcome mat and tell you that you are definitely in the right place. This is the show where we interview fascinating CEOs and founders of the leading vertical farming companies from around the world. I'm your host, Harry Duran. In case you missed last week's episode, we had a great conversation, really fascinating, deep diving, sharing personal stories, all the kind of stuff that I love to talk about on this show with founder and CEO of Ketos, Meena Shankaran. She joined the show to talk about her passion for leveraging disruptive technologies to make an impact as a social entrepreneur. If you're not familiar with Ketos, it's a vertically integrated water intelligence platform on a mission to transform how water operators measure, manage, and forecast water quality. Great episode talking about her immigration story, Women in Her Strength, the group that she started, and her passion for solving existential problems and doing good at the same time. Please check it out if you haven't already. Last episode, episode 61. This week, another great conversation with the founder and CEO of Vertical Future, Jamie Burrows. He's a passionate leader with an extensive knowledge of the indoor AgTech space. If you're not familiar with Vertical Future, it's the world's leading vertical farming technology and research company, which provides revolutionary products and services that enable people and nature to thrive. And in this episode, Jamie and I talk about his passion for health, life sciences, and addressing critical issues like climate change, food inequalities, and population health. We dig in on Jamie's leadership style, the focus and mission of Vertical Future, and key milestones he's reached along the journey. As a reminder, if you're enjoying this episode or past episodes, I'm looking out for those ratings and reviews. You can leave one at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. I'd love to read yours out next. All right, let's get into this conversation with Jamie. So Jamie Burrows, founder and CEO of Vertical Future, thank you for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
No problem. Thanks very much, Harry. And pleasure to be here.
So where in the world are you dialing in from?
I am dialing in from sunny southeast London.
Okay.
Which is rare, but I live down in southeast London with my family.
I just said dialing in from, and I probably dated myself with that reference because I think it's been a while since I've had a phone or a rotary phone. I don't know if you remember how far back, or I think my parents held on to their copper line for as long as they could. I don't know when the transition happened in the UK.
I think our last copper line was, I don't know, a long time ago. It was definitely my parents, not us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
my 3 kids are not seeing those.
Yeah, exactly. So I was looking at a bit of your background, and I thought it was interesting that you spent some time in the Air Force. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. I'm half American. I grew up in America, so until I was kind of 10, 11, and then I went back when I was 16 and did some time enlisted, and then actually at the Air Force Academy. So yeah, always had a passion for flying and that kind of stuff. And then decided I didn't want to do a whole career in it, but did a good 5 years. It was a really, really good experience.
What was life like growing up? Was it in Florida where you grew up?
No, my mother was from Seattle and my dad was from Manchester.
Okay.
So I was born in Wales, then moved to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and then very randomly, and then back to Seattle, then back to the UK, then back to all over the US. Then I've been all over.
Yeah. Which one of those was more of a culture shock? I mean, growing up in New York, I guess you had some of the references, but was it going and coming back or going to the UK in the first place?
To be fair, I don't really remember because, I mean, they're all quite
different.
I definitely don't remember Riyadh when I was a kid because I was like, I don't know, very young. But culture shock, probably my wife and I, when we had our first child, we moved to Brussels in my mid-20s for a consulting role.
Oh, okay.
And that was quite interesting because we lived right around the corner from the commission, and that was quite a culture shock in a good way. I really liked it there, but it was quite different from other places we lived. But it was all very, very different experiences and lots of nice people in everywhere we've lived.
Where did the fascination for flying in airplanes come from?
So my grandfather was a Spitfire pilot who actually was a US Air Force pilot, but he flew over. So he came over to, obviously, during World War II and lived with the Brits. I think he flew in North Africa as well. And I just really got a passion for flying when I was growing up. And when I was 16, the day before I was supposed to start my A-levels, I said to my parents, I'm going to join the military in the US. And you can imagine how that went down. And found myself on a yellow bus being shouted at by a drill sergeant in San Antonio, Texas, 2 days later. So that was quite an introduction to adulthood. So it's
yeah, a bit of a shock for anyone who's joined. And thank you for your service, by the way, as well. But to show up at boot camp where the rules are quite different than they probably are at home is, I'm sure, always a bit of a shock.
Well, I was certainly the only person with a British accent, so you can imagine how that went down with the drill instructor. So,
oh, that's true. That's funny. So how accurate, for those interested, are the Top Gun movies to what really happens in the Air Force?
Top Gun's Navy.
Oh, that's right, Top Guns. But I'm thinking about the flying scenes. That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so I've had some time in F-15, so I've had about 16 hours in F-15.
Okay.
Mostly incentive rides, and I did go too. I've got about got a lot of hundreds of hours of flying experience, but in smaller aircraft. But I've been in the Air Force equivalent, which is the F-15, which has the vertical stabs. Stabilizers at the back, and it's incredible. But I can't really talk to operational service. I've never been deployed.
Yeah.
I've never gone to war or anything. So but certainly the camaraderie and the way that people speak and things like that in the military was certainly accurate. A lot of hazing and in a good way, but yeah, I think the Navy and the Air Force are quite different. So I don't know.
Yeah. Is there something I've heard from multiple pilots? There's this sense of calm you get when you're in the air, and just that feeling of just like, being in control of an aircraft, but also, that time you get to spend is not something that's something that very few people ever get to experience. And I'm wondering what that actual experience is like for you.
It depends how many G's you're pulling. So yeah, you can have some very calm moments in the air, but ultimately, yeah, if you're doing I've never done really kind of crazy stuff, and most of mine was training, so I was in the back. But I pulled, 6.5 Gs, and that's certainly not a car. But yeah, when you're up there, even in a small aircraft, a Cessna 172 or something, which I learned to fly in, or you do have a certain degree of calmness and separation from everything else that's going on below you.
Yeah. It's hard to think about any other thing about, like, whether if you took the trash out that day when you're I imagine when you're at 6.5 Gs, that singular focus, I think, is something that's pretty interesting as well.
Yes. From what I can recall, yes.
Yeah. So just transitioning there. So when you left the Air Force and you started to focus on your career, did you have an idea what type of work you wanted to get into? And I noticed you've had a couple of stints in consulting as well.
Yeah. So I came out, and obviously, I needed to figure out what I wanted to do next. So I completed my degrees. So I did a bachelor's in economics and master's in energy trade and finance, and then took my first role on in economic regeneration. Considered going into banking, and got some offers, and decided to go down that track, which I think was a good choice in the long run. But who knows, right? And then in parallel with that kind of 4-year economic regeneration role, I did a PhD, which I haven't quite finished yet because other things have taken over my life.
Okay. But
I'm only a couple of papers away. And then I kind of hopped from consulting company to consulting company. They were poaching me along the way. And so that's when I went to Brussels. And then I came back to EY in London. And then I got another job. And that next job that I got, I didn't really like the environment. So that's where the consulting career stopped. I had a nice secondment in the Department of Health during that time, which was really interesting because despite forgetting about all the Air Force stuff, my discipline's always been in economics with a focus on health and life science. That's kind of really been my passion. So that was certainly a really interesting and varied experience for me.
Where do you think, or can you point back to the origins of your interests in health and life sciences, like where that came from?
Sure, yeah. Well, in economics, I've just been fascinated. And actually, I had a very good professor at university. So obviously, I had to choose business economics before. Well, I chose business economics before seeing any of my professors. So nobody inspired me into that. I just chose that. But in terms of health, my mother was an NHS chief exec. So, health and the National Health Service and anything health related discussions around the dinner table would occur on a very regular basis. So that's probably where it came from. So yeah, I've taken probably inspiration from people in my family for things that I've done in my life in those kind of first two. I mean, I'm 36 now and I've effectively had three careers, the military, the consulting, and now obviously Ultra Vertical Future. So it's been quite interesting.
Can you recall when indoor ag, controlled environment agriculture, like when that started to appear on your radar or you started hearing about it?
Yeah, so a really good friend of mine mentioned it to me. I'd left that last role in consulting. He sent me an article on a company in the US, a shipping container, doing the container farming, which isn't necessarily, it's just one small part of the overall sector. And it's the first I'd heard of it, really. I was pretty fascinated. And when I think about economics, I think the first thing that came to my mind was, efficiency, allocative and technical efficiency, and how you use space. And really that's what a container farm's about in the most basic sense, making the most possible use of space and putting it in a location where it would, you otherwise wouldn't grow food. And I was inspired by that. And then just, I'd had some life experience. From a personal standpoint, both my parents had passed away in the kind of 2 years prior to, and I had a little bit of inheritance. 2 kids at the time, under 4 years old, and just decided that if I'm going to do something, then I should just go for it, really. And I think that idea was one that I felt had the most legs. There were some other ideas I formulated. One was in kind of focused on health, and it was more focused on the digital space. But and then actually when Vertical Future was set up, it actually had kind of different themes around it, different verticals really. And then it just so happened that we really ran with the vertical farming aspect for a multitude of reasons, and I'm sure many of them in this discussion.
And so how did you think about what approach you wanted to take? What specific track within vertical farming was most interesting to you to pursue? And then if I'm correct, first-time CEO, what are some of the things you start to think about as you try to decide how do you actually go about building a team to support you on this?
Well, I'd run teams in EY and also in the company I was at after was IMS Health, which had merged to become UEIA, I think. So, I had some experience, and I think looking back kind of 7 to 10 years, I'd had a tremendous amount of exposure to what a good leader is, what a bad leader is at the Air Force Academy, of course. And so many examples. Was mentored, personally by colonels, a general on several occasions, actually completed a leadership enrichment and development program. So I had some knowledge and understanding of how you should build and run a team. And then also some looking at myself, what are my personality traits and how could they actually be applied to building a team? And, what kind of leader am I? Am I more of a assertive leader that wants to, have a tyrannical structure, which is usually doesn't end up very well. And, I'm a big guy anyway, so that wouldn't work. So I think I had a good idea about how to go about it and some good experiences and people to call on from my past. And also I've been very fortunate in my life to have, after my parents had passed away, have some mentors who, could give me some experience and, not fill the whole gap, but, fill parts of that gap.
I was going to ask that. Are there some mentors or managers that come to mind that had an impact on you and your development, your professional development?
Yeah. So, looking over the 6 years of Vertical Future VF, our first chairman Hamish Davidson, who stepped down last year after 5 years of service, was a really good mentor to me. And then more recently, Lord Chris, who ran the National Health Service, who's our current chairman, has been tremendously supportive. But interestingly, I think when it comes to mentoring, you don't necessarily need to have one mentor or one coach.
Yeah,
you can learn things from people, from different lived experiences from those people, and kind of everything together, and then figure out, this is the kind of person, these are the things I need to change in my company and about myself to be more successful or make us more efficient. But I mean, I didn't fully answer your question, but in terms of choosing the kind of vertical farming model that we elected to go for, at the beginning, it was myself, my wife. Obviously, we had our 2 kids at home. We had no family in London. We had about 100 grand to put in to build a small farm. We took an abandoned warehouse, and we had a full debenture on our assets. So if it went bust, we lose everything. So it was tremendously. I mean, I've told the story many times. You've probably read it. So that was the vertical farming model we chose was somewhat governed by the amount of capital that we had available at the time.
Yeah.
And the amount of human resource. So I had a bit of money on the side, which I used to support my family, so to pay myself. And then we decided to set up the equivalent of probably 3 or 4 shipping containers and shipping containers usually have about 30 square meters of growing space, sometimes a bit more, but within an indoor setting. And the unit economics of vertical farming demand that, it's all about space and scale. And if you want to compete, then you need big farms, you need a lot of capital. We were kind of forced into the bracket of selling, your premium quality, but also premium price microgreens and things to restaurants. The first couple of years of the business were just going around and working night shifts, because the way that chefs work is, they finish their shift and then they want to put their order in for the next day. And because they're perishables, literally. So I'd work until probably 5 a.m. We had a couple of people to help with deliveries in the morning. We had a person to help me at night. Marie, my wife, would do deliveries in the morning. And then we really just built a customer base from there. And a lot of it was about, didn't spend money on marketing. It's about word of mouth, getting a couple of good chefs on board who supported us. And then obviously, just building from there. And that's how we've built the first part of the business. Our business has really evolved over the past kind of roughly 6 years, but learning kind of being down in the trenches and understanding actually how to not a lot of capital into a successful business that people value and can actually stand behind the quality of the produce and the service. The service shouldn't be forgotten here. It was a big achievement for us, and got a lot of support.
I'm curious, or I'd be remiss if I didn't ask what the conversation was like with your wife as you're getting ready to go down this path, and what that conversation at the dinner table must have been like too, and if she knew what she was going to be signing up for.
The conversation when we first started talking about Vertical Future was, I think probably, Marie has always been Marie, my wife, has always been very supportive of me and my ideas. And, we knew it was a big risk, but I think we just went for it, just said, we'd been through so much in the years prior to that from a personal standpoint. So it actually wasn't really too difficult a conversation. Clearly, we had no experience in the sector, so there was a big learning curve, but I think we were confident enough in ourselves and our abilities to be able to make it work.
And how much of the experience that you had, because you had all the previous experience at these consulting companies, and I imagine a lot of having worked in a couple of finance companies where we had consultants come in, their ability to really just see the big picture, understand operationally where there's places for improved efficiencies. And so I think a lot of those skill sets that you may have had, did those come into play as you were thinking about how to hit the ground running and what was the most effective and or efficient way for you to get started?
Honestly, I didn't really take a lot from the previous experiences.
Oh, really?
I think actually my military experience was in the structure, which was obviously years before, I think helped a lot. I think the experiences in consulting and in data, obviously the most recent ones prior to setting up Vertical Future, have really come into play and are much more useful now because you learn a lot of invaluable skills. People underrate things like how to deal with a client, how to pitch, how to do a really good PowerPoint. how to do an Excel model, how to do a fully integrated kind of corporate finance model, integrating with yield data and all this kind of, all of these things. When we evolved our business into more of a tech business, came in handy, because in that kind of mid stage, which I'm sure we'll go on to talk about, was still very much doing bits of everything, and still am to a degree. So I think they did come in handy then. I think any consultant you speak to from any of the big four consulting firms will tell you that PowerPoint or Excel were big takeaways for them if they ever left.
Pivot tables.
Pivot tables, exactly.
So, Jamie, give us the sped up version you launched in 2016. So maybe just taking it, if you think of it as snapshots, 2017, 18 to present, give us some milestones that happened along the way to bring us to present day.
Sure. So 2016 to 2019 was what I would say we were growers. We split the vertical farming sector into kind of grower brands who are now having to raise a lot of capital because the scale is required and demand and supply side. And then we got that just about into profitability, which was good. I mentioned earlier we were selling premium. We were also selling and competing with traditional farms and glass houses on pricing in London. So we didn't actually put a big premium on a lot of our products. So again, I think that was a major achievement at that stage. In 2019, we did roughly a £4 million raise, just over.
Okay.
That's fund here in the UK. At that stage, we realized that there were two major, it's kind of a crossroads. And we realized two things. One is, I just mentioned it, if you're a grower, it's very, very, very capital intensive, and it will continue to be for the next however long vertical farming exists, which I think is a permanent fixture in our economy. So that was the first one. And at that point, I didn't really have the investment context to £4 million, unless you want a very, very basic system, which is very OPEX intensive, is not a lot of money. We'd have to fundraise really quickly again after that, probably. So, and then the second realization was that the technology we'd been using, which was from a supplier here in the UK, it was, one of the very popular international lighting LED suppliers who I won't mention. Great lights, Dutch beds, very standard vertical farming systems. No automation, no data integration, no end-to-end integration with any of the ancillary components. And I just realized that this is just so inefficient. And so we said, look, first of all, let's take a step back and let's build a company now, leveraging all of that prior growing experience and our knowledge of the market and how to interact with customers, and actually build something which has as much as possible in-house, so that we can actually then go to a company like us 3 years ago and say, look, here's the system, here's the data, here's the expertise, here's the know-how, here are the standard operating procedures. Let's hold your hand through the first year of building this. And there's still a huge deficiency in that. I mean, there are companies that are piecemealing bits of tech together. It's almost like having Brickbo and Lego and trying to somehow make them fit.
Sure.
And so we went down that route, built three core teams: software engineering, and plant R&D. You can look on our website. We have amazing people who I won't tell you, they took, pretty big pay cuts to come and work for us. Now being rewarded because of where we are. It's three teams. And then fast forward 3 years, our kind of next milestone following on from that decision to develop the technologies was our first major sale, which was a £2.5 million project in the Midlands. It was a group of entrepreneurs who'd been in dentistry. You can check them out. They're named Cyan Farms. They're building a very interesting brand in their own right. They've also got some other verticals in their business around, vegan food and so on, and on-site production. I'm a meat eater, but I eat less meat now, but I've tried their products and they're amazing. So they instilled a lot of trust in us. Okay. In early 2021, we signed our first contract to build that farm. We're just about to complete that. During that time as well, we also deployed a lot of shipping containers to various customers, one being a company called Creative Plate in London. Again, I mentioned the unit economics of vertical farming. It's very predicated on scale. However, we do believe that shipping containers can be used for things like learning and education, outreach, premium products, ultra urban growing, and so on. So we believed in their model as well. So we kind of put a mini version of our automated system and stripped out some of the automation and worked with them. And they'd been working previously with one of the biggest shipping container suppliers globally. So that was another really important milestone. They're about to complete. So both the companies I've just spoken about have just completed or are completing good investment rounds and are kind of really first two pivotal customers, but I'd say partners, because they've trusted a lot of us, and it hasn't been a smooth ride when you develop an entire tech system, including the SaaS around it, because it's fully automated. I haven't gone into the details of our system, but it's end to end. There's many components developed in-house. It's challenging, and there are errors and there are mistakes, and any tech company that says otherwise are a lie. So was that. And then the next major milestone has been our recent 22.3 or 0.4 million pound raise, which is our Series A that completed about 3 months ago. We did that without any venture capitalists. We actually turned down some pretty substantive offers from some large VC funds and decided to keep it at this stage, the Series A stage, a cap table structure, which consists of ultra high net worth and individuals who believe in what we're doing. And whilst that's a bit of a headache when it comes to paperwork and shareholder and stakeholder management, we just felt that it was better for our company at this time. For our Series B, we may do something different. And then fourth or fifth milestone where we are, I think, has been really building our commercial team, because I mentioned those projects we've sold. We've had millions of pounds of revenue over the last couple of years, but we've done that without a commercial function. In the past 3 to 4 months, we've built our first kind of outward-looking commercial function, which has generated a lot of business for us. So I think that's another really key milestone.
Very interesting. Yeah, a lot of points there to sort of pull apart. I want to circle back to your mention of the in-house tech stack that you've built. Can you elaborate on that and why that was an important decision for you, and to the extent that we can cover some of the components of that and how they all integrated and work together?
Sure. So I think that they're on our side of the equation. So if you've got the growers over here and you've got the tech providers over here, you have a lot of companies that are building discrete components. So it might just be lights and really great lighting companies.
Yeah.
But then you've got what I would call systems integrators. So they'll piecemeal tech from different people, position it as a system of their own and sell it on. And there's a really big one I'm not going to mention that are getting a lot of airtime. They're a systems integrator. We know their CapEx and it's very high. And it makes sense for the CapEx to be high because they're having to eat the margins from the people they're buying from, and then they're having to sell it on and make a margin themselves. And then, of course, when you're piecemealing different bits of tech together to build a vertical farm, you need a software system that's going to be able to fully integrate all those different bits of tech. And if you're piecemealing it, it's very difficult to do. You could go and it's like going down to my kitchen and trying to integrate my, Philips washing machine with my, fridge from some other brand. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, LG.
I forget all these brands. The principal decision to do everything in-house, even though it was it still continues to be a very challenging task, because you have to go through so many stages of tech development, hardware side and the software side, and it's very expensive, was mainly to have an end-to-end system. So if, these are long-term infrastructure projects, things will break and customers will come back and they'll say, right, I need this replaced. So you need very clear maintenance regimes. If you're coming back to one central party who is responsible and legally responsible for that, long-term maintenance regime, it's far easier. Secondly, if you're building everything in-house, your CapEx is going to be lower because you're doing it yourself. You have full control of it. Thirdly, as part of our recent investment round, we've actually invested a lot in in-house manufacturing. So being able to actually then even take a step further in controlling the supply chain, going straight to the commodities market to get our steel, has given us more control and brought down brought down prices for customers on the CapEx side. So for this sector to really work, we need cheaper systems that are more advanced. And the two of them don't usually go hand in hand. So I think the baseline for the sector has been that a more advanced system, which has R&D level capabilities, has to be way more expensive. But it shouldn't have to be, really. I think an R&D level system, in terms of the level of control and flexibility you have, should be implicit within a vertical farm. because a vertical farm is going to be dealing with many different crops, and all of these crops like different things. So you need that control and flexibility. You can't just have one type of light, 60% red, 40% blue, whatever you have. That'll work. That's fine. The question is, are you going to achieve those long-term economies of scale? And are you going to be able to actually build a system that can compete at price parity with cheap foreign imports? We're pretty sure, I mean, people are very private. We're pretty open about what we're doing. People are very private about, in our sector, about what they're doing. But we're pretty sure that there are a lot of lies. Maybe lies is a bit more, but there's a lot of overselling going on.
Yeah.
So now a company will pick their highest yielding crop and say, this is your average yield for the year. And this is what you should be selling. And we're going to build you a 10,000 square meter farm, and you're only going to grow micro radish or micro broccoli. Now, a hell of a lot of microgreens, and nobody's going to buy that. I mean, some people will buy it. It's a limited market. It will saturate. So we're taking a very different approach, despite the fact that today we're moving on to, I think the next size farm we're building is, I think, roughly kind of 11,000 square meters.
Okay.
We're still not even close to the scale that we want to be at in terms of making unit economics truly work. I mean, they do work at that scale for particular crops, but for some of these other crops being mentioned in the sector, we need to be getting much bigger, and we need to be bringing that CapEx point down.
And I think what you've probably already discovered is having all the different components of that tech stack in-house. You have the different teams able to talk to each other about what's working, what's not. Whereas if they were separate or outsourced and there was a need for the software to work differently with the lighting or the irrigation, it'd be a harder challenge to sort of, to your point, like earlier analogy, like the Lego block these things together. Whereas it becomes, I imagine there's regular meetings where everyone's talking and everyone's saying, hey, the software's not working for this specifically. And I think having that as a cohesive team that can feed off each other and see where the progress is being made and where there's gaps and rooms for improvement, I think is probably proving very valuable for you.
Indeed. Although I would say that having a business which has a software and a hardware arm and an infrastructure arm, an operating arm, is very challenging from a managerial standpoint. And as you scale, and this is the phase that we're in now, where it's not a case of we have projects, it's more a case of choosing which projects we pursue. Because especially when you start going internationally, I mean, you really we have this continual development pathway on the kind of hard engineering side. We have a wraparound software solution, which is being enriched by internal R&D. But if there are breaks in communication between those teams, you can have problems. So from a technology standpoint and an overall offering standpoint, when it works, and it is working, it's great. But you really have to carefully, as our business moves forward and close to 60 staff now, we're at only 10 staff a year and a half ago. I think it's really, really important from a managerial standpoint and across the entire C-suite to ensure everything joins up in a very cohesive manner. And I think that's a challenge for most companies. It's just, I think, for ours is probably a bit more complex because of the number of areas that we have involved.
Jamie, can you talk a little bit about your specific focus and where you're headquartered? You're in the UK, and I imagine because of the experience you have there and because of the system you've created there, I feel like you're best suited to understand sort of the lay of the land there and what the opportunities are that exist in the UK, better than most. So can you talk a little bit about your expertise there?
Yes. So we've got an R&D center in Deptford, which is very close to Greenwich. So for those who don't know where Deptford is, it's southeast London, just across from Canary Wharf. That's where we've been for 6 years. We have R&D center there on our older site, which is not our tech. Above that's a kind of big 2-story warehouse. We've got a headquarters at the bridge, so just by the mayor's office and Tower Bridge. So if you want to come and have a nice meeting with us and then sit out opposite Tower Bridge, it's very nice. In the summer, in the winter, it's not so good. And then we have a manufacturing site north of London. Then we have, I think, 8 or 9 deployed vertical farms across the UK, relatively small, obviously a larger one coming online with Cyan Farms in the next kind of 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
And then our bigger focus has been, and there are some confidential aspects to this, so I can't talk too much about it, but as I mentioned, our next farm is an 11,000 square meter farm. We have infrastructure funders who we're talking to who do want to support us with this undertaking. I think there's been, I can't talk to the European markets, but I can certainly say that in the UK market, we've seen a change in the way that investors are looking at the sector. So previously, if you spoke to a PE fund or a VC fund, they would look at it as a parent level company investment and expectation for an exit or return in a very short time horizon. Whereas infrastructure funds who have traditionally done things like solar and other kind of more infrastructure focused assets or investments, I think they're starting to turn towards it and notice that there's a real opportunity here, not just in terms of making money, which funds obviously want to do, but to do something meaningful. So from an ESG standpoint and tackling some of the challenges that we all face. I mean, food security, food processing, supply chains. I mean, I don't need to go through them all because I'm sure all of your listeners and viewers are aware of all the challenges we face.
Sure.
Yes, I think the UK climate will probably see some of the US players coming here and some of the other European players, and I'm aware of it already. I think people underappreciate that even in a country the size of, even in the UK, you still need to spend a hell of a lot of money on building out vertical farming or glasshouse infrastructure, even have or a single digit share of the market for a specific product. We're talking about hundreds of millions, in fact, moving into the billions of capital investment that are required over many years to make it happen. So it's a really hot topic, vertical farming. It should be, but it's really, I mean, this is a long-term sector. And of course, there will be companies that will do a couple of investment rounds, raise as much money as they can, do an IPO. Great, good for them. But if we really wanted to do this correctly, we could do this for 10, 20, 30, 40 years and really build out a proper kind of reactive or protectionist system where we're food independent in some ways. Not for every product, clearly. I'm not going to be one of these fanatics that says that we should grow, I don't know, avocados and things in vertical farms. I think it's absolute fantasy. Of course, you can grow it, but it's a question as to whether or not you should grow it, because do the unit economics work? So yeah, I think there are many opportunities in the UK and we'll continue to see build outs. I think most of the build outs will be in the more rural or peri-urban areas. We tend to deviate away from the term urban farming because we talk very much about, CEA or vertical farming. But yeah, certainly the UK is going to be a big focal point in the future.
Yeah, I think this topic of food independence is really top of mind for a lot of folks, given what's been happening the past couple of years. And I think you're really at the forefront in terms of figuring out which are the crops that you can specialize in that allow that, but also because of all the R&D and work you're putting into the company, I think there's opportunities which may not have surfaced yet, but are sort of bubbling around in the minds of the folks on your team in terms of what's possible.
Yeah, I think we'd like to, there's a process, right? I mean, there's the saying, don't run before you can walk or even crawl.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the sector has kind of jumped to the running or even sprinting stage without really properly validating the technology. And I think the sector will pay for that in future years, or actually the buyers of those systems will pay for that. And that's not to claim that we have the best system in the world. We don't know if we have the best system in the world because we don't know what everybody else is doing. I mean, we have a good idea and a good understanding of based on what people share. But I think getting it right at a small scale and understanding it and then building up is really important. It's maybe not the thing that early stage investors want quite a lot. And that's one of the reasons why we didn't go with a VC for this round. We wanted to have more time to kind of still develop the tech, make sure that we hit those proof points, and then really, really scale. Because, I mean, that's the proper way to do it. And there's a reason why we're doing most of it in the UK. I mean, we have a lot of opportunities globally that we could go for. But if you can't prove, I mean, we've hit proof points at particular levels of scale, but you can run these farms for a while, monitor them, and make sure that everything's good from a yield standpoint, from a system standpoint, from a maintenance standpoint, before really kind of expanding out. So I think, the only other geography that we've targeted, I mean, there are 3 core geographies for us, which are UK and mainland Europe, the Middle East and Southeast Asia, specifically Singapore. We've got a partnership in Singapore. We've been working on that for 18 months and a huge company that we're working with there. in the Middle East. We have a lot of opportunities, but we're kind of holding fire for now to determine when's the right time to kind of push the go button on those based on what we're doing in the UK. Because it's a classic error for a lot of scale-up companies is to expand too quickly and overextend yourself and not satisfy your customers. And you get one vertical farm that goes wrong, or I don't know, there's an E. coli outbreak because you don't have the right policies in place and the operator who's bought the farm hasn't followed them. That'll come back to your brand. So that's a really good case to be made for not expanding too quickly.
Makes sense. Are you discovering specific regional challenges when it comes to working in Singapore and the Middle East, different than obviously anything you might see in the UK?
There's far more government intervention. And I think a lot of, which we knew before, I think the Middle East, you have to understand the culture. You need to have local partners. And things are just in a different way. I was in the Middle East 2 weeks ago and having dates and tea that I've never tried before, which was delicious. And just culturally, I think it's very important to understand how they work. And a lot of that is ingrained in the way that they approach business. Same thing goes in Singapore. In Singapore, you find yourself having a very serious business day and then going in quite heavy night drinking sake. This is kind of how business is done. And you could say the same thing about the UK. Yeah. I think the way that I've spoken specifically about the customers or the partners that we've spoken to and are working with, but more so, it's more difficult to get a project off the ground in those geographies because there are more hoops to jump through. There are more regulations. In Singapore, for example, you require a farm license. So it's more challenging. The UK has far less red tape. I don't think UK is moving fast enough, actually. I think there should be more policy and more thought leadership that goes into this and how we want to position this. Like, it is going on in the background, but it's just not as evident as the Middle East and Southeast Asia, Singapore, and probably some other parts of the world as well.
Fascinating to just get a taste for what the different cultures are like. And just to your point, like without having that on the ground knowledge of how business is done, you'd probably find yourself at a disadvantage if you didn't have that experience trying to go into those markets and then just trying to learn it on the spot.
Completely. I mean, we're told that it happens again and again. You see foreign companies showing up and knocking on the door and just not understanding how things are done. And maybe that's one reason why we haven't seen the build out of vertical farming systems to the degree that you would expect in a place like the Middle East, because the Middle East is a perfect candidate. They very little arable land, high prices, growing population, impact of climate change, many, many reasons, a lot of capital. So investment is really not an issue out there. Why have we not seen more large scale vertical farms? I mean, a couple of the US companies have gone over. There've been some local companies, but I would have expected to see a much more rapid expansion, but maybe the reasons we've discussed, the underlying basis for that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So a couple of questions as we come to a close here. I'm curious, what's a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently?
So energy prices has been a big one for us. It's questions on it every week, and it's something we've thought a lot about. I think when we developed our system, we focused on a very different approach to, if you watch videos of our systems, it looks very different than other vertical farms. We focus a lot on power and on light and on manipulating different wavelengths of light to bring about different expressions in crops. So focusing on the primary or the secondary metabolism of the crop, focusing maybe on blue and green and then a bit of red, or, these are the plant recipes. This is where the IP is actually. There isn't really a lot of IP in the actual hardware.
Yeah.
So response to the kind of inflection in energy prices, which we kind of preempted, we've been doing this research anyway, is just to figure out where we can push the boundaries. How can we shape the cycle of the crop? Probably I didn't articulate that in the right way, but how can we trick a crop to grow in a particular way and manipulate the conditions so that we're actually using less energy but creating more biomass and also maintain quality principles? And we posted something on LinkedIn recently. We found with, I think it was a butterhead lettuce variety, we did a whole load of things mostly around light and selecting different light wavelengths at levels of intensity throughout the growing process. And we found that we use roughly 25% less power, also adding to the fact that our lights, because the way they're designed, emit less heat, which means as a positive externality, we use less power across the planet anyway, because it doesn't, the ancillary system have to work as hard. But through those tests, we found 25% less energy, but we saw it between a 20% and 43% increase in biomass growing cycle, which just shows that it disproves the whole point about just putting some shelves up and putting some really high wattage lights and just blasting energy at a crop is the way forward. It's really not. So I think this is where our approach of centralized R&D, and we've got 9 PhDs and one who's almost got a PhD. I shouldn't single him out, but amazing plant scientists, all focused on different areas. So yeah, that's probably been the biggest thing for us, and it's something that we are tackling. Because if investors or the market think that vertical farming is dead, because prior to the energy price inflections, they were already saying, oh, it's too energy intensive, too carbon intensive, then the sector's in trouble. So we have to find, it's almost like flying a plane, you have to, throw out some countermeasures if you see a missile coming at you. So that's been the biggest topic recently.
And I appreciate you bringing full circle with the airplane reference too. Thank you for that. And yeah, it's interesting because to your point, it's one of those fields that there's never going to be a shortage of problems to fix. And for creative and highly intelligent people who thrive on finding solutions to problems like this, I think to your point, it sounds like you've got the right team in the right environment to figure out just how to move forward with these sorts of challenges.
We have an excellent team, and it's very diverse in skill set, and in other ways, it's definitely it's the team that makes it or breaks it, and it's definitely not a sector where you have oversupply of people who have expertise in this. So finding good people and holding on to them is very, very important.
So last question for you, just on a personal level, Jamie. I mean, I imagine there's a different experience and a feeling and excitement about where you were when you started this in 2016. So what keeps you motivated? What keeps you excited, 6 years into this with all the growth and the challenges and the success you've had along the way? I'm just curious on a personal level, what has you excited about the future?
Well, from a personal standpoint, I do really believe in the fact that what we're doing is addressing very important topics, and will continue to. And actually, the R&D work that my team will continue to do through the years is just going to make our offering better and better. And address, I'm a big believer in climate change. I really think that a lot of the data is underreported. I think we're going to have massive problems with agriculture in the future. So, and didn't talk a lot about health, despite being from a health background, but I really think there's a big health angle related to vertical farming. You hear stories, and there's peer-reviewed studies relating to declining sperm counts in places in Africa because they have overexposure to pesticides and babies being born without limbs. No. This is really pesticide use which is a necessity actually if you're growing outside, because you have to be able to grow the crops, but it's not indoors. So that's another reason. But personally, my main driver is not really my personal successes. I enjoy my job. I love it. It's more so my kids. I want to be able to do something that's had an impact on the world, as corny as it may sound. And when I'm older, I can say to my kids, look, we built a nice company and it's doing good things and we have happy customers. And, these people over here are eating produce grown at farms that we developed the tech 4 years ago at fair prices. We've done something good. And I think that's a nice story to tell your kids. I've got 3, the 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 6-month-old. I'm not having any more. I think, mind you, it's not me that has to have them, but we're not having any more. Mind you, I've said that several times. And so, I think that's really the main driving force. Family, I think, is a real driving force for many people, not just entrepreneurs. So it's not really personal gain that is something for me. And the money side of things, of course, we're building a big company. We have a 100 million plus valuation. That's all well and good. But if you're not happy in your job, and it's been proven that people that, make money aren't necessarily happy, they're not necessarily correlated. So that's not really something that I just want to be comfortable and have a nice family and have something to be proud of.
Well, that's a perfect way to wrap up and then just understand that it's been interesting to just hear your story and hear your passion for why you're into this, and, why this is important for you, and your commitment to, leaving the earth a better place than you found it. And I think that's really admirable. And I want to applaud you on your journey and the launch and the success of the company, because it's not an easy environment. There's a lot of buzz around it, but that doesn't necessarily translate to having success in this industry. So congrats and kudos to you and the team for what you've put together so far and to your ongoing success.
Thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure to have this chat. And thanks for inviting me on.
Likewise. Verticalfuture.com is the website. Is any other place we should direct folks to learn more about you and or the company?
I think LinkedIn is where we do a lot of our activity. We don't really focus on the other social media platforms. So find us on LinkedIn. Very importantly, it's Vertical Future. You didn't get it wrong, but a lot of people get it wrong. There's no S on the end. So it's this is a very common mistake that people end up thinking they're going after a vertical farming company. And I think it's a trading company or something.
Okay.
Verticalfuture.com. And then if you want to get in touch, you can email us at info@verticalfuture.co.uk.
Okay. One thing I did forget to mention is that because of this audience and because of who listens to the podcast, is there anything that you have that would be an ask or just a message to your colleagues and folks in the industry?
Be more transparent. Don't over accentuate what you can deliver on, and let's build this together. Building something together doesn't mean sharing IP. It just means that, we're on the same page and, we're all going in the right direction. There are lots of customers out there that we can go after, and it doesn't need to be a cutthroat industry. This is a long-term industry here. This is not a quick fire thing. So that would be my main message. And to be fair, I'm in contact regularly with CEOs of some of the quote, biggest vertical farming companies in the world in terms of capital raised, and they're lovely people and they're exactly on the same page.
Yeah, and that's a consistent message that I've been hearing throughout these episodes as well. So I'm glad you continue to deliver that message. Thanks again for your time, Jamie. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Have a nice evening.
Thanks again to Jamie for coming on the show and sharing his story. As always, I value the time that people spend on the show. I don't take it for granted. And I'm grateful when they let their guard down a little bit and share some of the insights into what got them to where they are today. And I think that's what's been inspiring for me and for the feedback I'm getting from listeners of the show. Thanks again to our Season 5 title sponsor, Cultivated. If you are looking into a vertical farm and don't know where to start or which technology would suit your needs, reach out to them today. Best of all, their service is free because they work on behalf of their partners. Learn more at cultivated.com, and that's spelled CULTIVATD.com. Just leave out that last E. Podcast production and marketing provided by Fullcast. Learn more at fullcast.co. As a reminder, if you are enjoying the show, please leave us a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. I'll be sure to read those out on future episodes. Next week, we have a return guest. It's Nicola Kerslecki of Contain, giving us an update on what's happening in her world. So looking forward to having that conversation and sharing it with you. Until we meet again next week, here's to your health.
Thanks for listening. To read the full show notes for this episode, which includes any links mentioned in the episode, as well as a full show transcription, visit verticalfarmingpodcast.com. There, you can sign up for our email list to be notified when new episodes are published.